How's everybody doing, by the way? Are you still awake? Yeah. All right. Internet working? Okay, I'll work on that. I'll go get my MiFi. 5 of you are set. All right, well, we have a very interesting panel coming up next. It's actually called You're Spending Your Money in All the Wrong Places, the demise of what used to be the traditional funnel. So I would like to introduce some very good friends. I have Chris Hewer and Giovanni Rodriguez from Deloitte. We have Rebecca Millman from McKinsey. And we have David Rogers from the Columbia University Center for Global Brand Leadership. Please join me in welcoming them on stage. Come on up, guys.
All right, I was supposed to introduce everybody, but I think Brian just did, so we'll jump right in. I think we've got about 20 minutes or so, so we were each going to toss an idea out there, sort of a discussion starter, and then after that, we'll try to take some questions from the audience, and also folks are tweeting. There's a hashtag, #AskPivotCon, right? #AskPivotCon. So I'll have that open on my pad, so hopefully you can see if there's any questions coming in there. We can all just take them from the room. Giovanni.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So I think the introduction was from Deloitte, and Chris is also from Deloitte, 2 Deloitte people on the same panel. I also want to talk about, I want to talk from my perspective as a board member of a new movement called Latinos in Social Media, because it touches on some of the work that I'm doing in the civic area. I'm also advising the White House on their Latino engagement strategy. And I think there's some relevance there we can bring over the corporate marketing world. We got together like maybe 2 weeks ago, and we decided we'll try to ask one provocative question each. And on the way here, I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? There's nothing more provocative than Occupy Wall Street. And since I'm actually looking at that area of the world of social engagement, I think the question I like to ask is, how much are we willing to learn from civic movements? Obviously, it doesn't map exactly to what's happening in the corporate world, but there are things that we can learn if we would allow ourselves. There are big risks to do that, but there are things that we can learn about how people organize or not. There are things we can learn about how movements are funded, which I think is partly what this is all about, this discussion. And then finally, there are things we can learn about what motivates people to do things on our behalf. That is the value proposition of social media, people doing things on our behalf. And I think if you look deeply at what's happening on the world stage today, particularly with civic movements, we can learn a lot.
Okay, so I'm going to lean forward here to show that I'm active. I'll start with a question and then actually provide a couple of answers and some perspective around it. The big question I really have is, are you willing to actually recognize which 50% of your advertising isn't working and do something else with that money? Because ultimately, we've known this for how long? I think since the first days of advertising that started to be realized, really, right? So the question is, where should we spend it if we're not spending it in advertising? And I think the answer is clear. Engage or die, right? We're looking at the idea of actually what can 50,000 points of engagement do for you if you're spending $500 million a year. I mean, think about the math on this. How much money you're spending to get leverage to get in front of people. How much money are you willing to spend to build a trusted relationship between employees inside your organization and the market at large? And what benefits are you going to get when you actually do that? The intangibles are off the roof. I think the tangibles are pretty clear as well. There's another sports drink company out there that's actually got 2 ambassadors in every state of the United States right now, going around participating in local athletics, in national athletics, and actually starting to work on this strategy in a very compelling sort of way. And I think that if we start looking at this differently and the reallocation of our advertising dollars, what we'll find is multiple benefits, not the least of which is solving our job creation problem. Think about the engagement centers we could have here in the US of people who are passionate about your company and the products and the market that it serves. And having all those passionate people working for your brand, what would that do for you? I contend that it's going to do a lot. The second component of this that's very important is to understand that social media has experience curve impacts relative to the competitive landscape, i.e., the more points of engagement you create through social media objects, whether they are tweets, Facebook posts, blog posts, videos, or any other form of online engagement that you have, the greater the potential for competitive advantage you will have in your market.
Hey,
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm Rebecca. I'm not going to lean forward because then you're going to realize that I'm about 8 inches shorter than he is. At least I can pretend while we're back here. So I'm going to maybe even pick up on a theme that you had. I feel like we're here at what we're calling the social media revolution, but we've been here before. And when I say here, I mean we've had to deal with a sort of game-changing, disruptive technology at least twice before and maybe more than that. I have enough gray hair, as do some of my friends up here, to remember when you dialed a phone and got a busy signal and had to call back, right? And then something came that was called the internet. And then something came that was called email.
I thought it was the answering machine as it came
The
first.
answering machine.
So
I'm
excited
skipping.
about this.
I'm skipping. But so we've dealt with disruptive change before. And yet somehow we find ourselves again at a point in time where the consumer and behavior has moved around us, where we are a set of companies and organizations trying to work in a landscape, and yet we haven't moved as fast as they have. We haven't moved our money, as the money that we use to engage and talk to them, as fast as their behavior has moved. So I want to ask a sort of provocative question. I want to talk a little bit about winners and then ask a provocative question of folks who are out there doing this work. If you look back, if you take a little bit of a lesson from history, and look back at companies that did well in the first couple disruptions, they were willing to do a couple things. They were willing to stay very actively on top of the landscape of change that was taking place, and that required a massive investment. It required a bunch of risk-taking and letting go of things that had worked in the past, which was a cultural mindset and a way of doing things. If your tennis court is in front of you and you're hitting balls this way, and suddenly the tennis court shifts, you're going to hit the ball, and a sliver of them are going to keep going where they're supposed to go. And you can keep telling yourself that it's working, but you're missing the bigger court. And I'm going to give you one quick example from our client work, and this is from the previous revolution. We worked with an electronics company, and that electronics company somehow missed the shift when Amazon went from being an online bookseller to the moment when Amazon went to being the biggest shopping search engine and comparative pricing tool that the consumer goes to. And they missed it. To their credit, they went back and did some research and understood that they had missed that shift and quickly moved their spend over there. And they became content managers and publishers who were very good at putting their specifications and their photos and everything that the shopper needed in front of them onto Amazon. They gave up the idea, the legacy idea they had, which was we have to drive shoppers to our.com and we need to engage them there. They said, we're going to give up, we're going to take the risk, and we're going to move our spend. Does this start to sound familiar? So what is the process that gets you there and gets you there fast? And I love our prior speaker, who I happen to work with at NM Insight, who put up the customer decision journey in front of you. That loop, the icon that she showed you of understanding that where your customer is at, how they're behaving, and where you can engage with them in the ecosystem is the most important investment you can make. It's not the development of a program, it's the development of insight. And this wonderful social media set of tools and capabilities that we have demands that we do it faster, demands that we do it in a continuous way, but also gives us the tool set to do it. And so the provocative question I would ask of you is, can you look me in the eyeballs and say, I know where my customer is, and I'm meeting them where they're at?
Great question. So my challenge, which I would put to marketers in the room and to all the marketers I meet and work with, is to be sure that you stop spending your money on digital marketing that does not have a clear dual value proposition. So any marketing needs to both be creating clear value for the customer in their own eyes, and it needs to also have a clear value chain to creating business impact for the firm. Basically, I see two kinds of mistakes. A lot of people I see are experimenting, which is great. People are trying new things. But when I see a lot of effort sort of fall on its face, it tends to happen for one of two reasons. One, I see businesses creating something, spending money on something, buying some sort of digital space, trying to buy some attention, which really is not creating any value to the customer. And we heard some earlier examples about this. I mean, for me, a lot of mobile advertising is still in this spot. You know, if you are putting something that's cluttering up the small space of my phone, and you are not so targeted and so compelling in your message that I'm actually glad to see you eating up, you know, the top of my screen, then you fail. And I think we're seeing a lot of wasted money as a result of not thinking about that customer value proposition. People creating, as we heard the example, the temple of the brand, these sort of microsites that really make the brand feel happy but don't do anything for the customer. The second kind of mistake is on the flip side. I see brands that are really excited, they're focused on engaging the customer, and we've got all these engagement metrics. You know, how long did they watch my YouTube video? How much time did they spend on my site? What's the interaction rate of the posts on my Facebook wall? You know, how many tweets am I getting? What's my word of mouth and resharing? What's the buzz that I'm picking up in my semantic web analysis? But if you do not build a conversion model that shows how any of these non-equivalent, non-comparable engagement metrics actually tie to a business metric, whether it's an ROI through, you know, acquisition, increased retention, upselling, et cetera, cost savings, or it's some other established metric within your business, something like a, you know, a net promoter score. Maybe you're trying to drive product trial. Whatever that business metric is, unless you've got that model, then what are you doing? You're spending money on engagement. As far as I'm concerned, you're just spending money to make somebody else happy. You've got to be able to show what that is doing to your firm. So again, you need to have both sides. You've got to show that whatever you're investing in does have a dual value proposition. And that's my challenge.
So there's another problem with why that doesn't work, and that's management by objective. Because you're talking about outcomes that don't meet my objectives, so why should I care inside my corporate silo? So in order to do this, we have to really expand our cross-boundary collaboration and realize, as we were talking about before, customer service is a new marketing. Well, customer service is marketing, PR is marketing, our retail point of sale is marketing. Everything is potentially marketing, because really marketing is about finding the right audiences and creating value for them and making connections with them.
Yeah, I say digital marketing is too important to leave the marketing department. You know?
So we're going to take questions.
Questions from the audience. Do you want to raise a hand and I'll check the Twitter stream?
Or answers.
Or answers.
Yeah.
Answers to the questions from the panel. Yes, in front.
All day I've been hearing about the various metrics, the way you measure things, read things, etc., to find out what it is that your audience wants. And I'm looking to find out where the Steve Jobs is in this business. The man who said, we don't do focus groups. It's not up to the audience to know what they want. It's up to us to know, make it, sell it to them. And you can't argue with the success that he had in doing that. In the Hollywood studios, it was always an old adage that you can always get turned down for your script, getting yes to do it. Because nobody really ever lost their job saying no. You're saying yes, and the movie's a big flop, and boom, you're out in your butt. So what I think I'm hearing a lot of today is people who are afraid to have confidence in their decisions and have to tie everything in to the way they read specific stats so that we can satisfy that pimply-faced 17-year-old there who's telling us what it is he wants. And I don't have enough confidence.
So how do you get that confidence to make a new investment in something that hasn't been tried before?
I'd like to react to that. It's a really good question. Actually, I think for a long time, we did take that tough, we know what we're doing, let's do it. We'll figure out the right way to measure it. And it was successful for some time because in the early phase of the so-called social business movement, a lot of these conversations were happening with innovators, people who were willing to try things for the first time. So I would say our clients felt that way as well. One example is Best Buy. Chris and I had the great fortune of working with them a while back. They did something very unusual that actually proved a way of doing social media at scale. And the idea was to support what was a very emergent movement inside their company and to invest in that. Blue Shirt Nation was not an invention from corporate. It was something that was already happening inside. They decided to support it, and what was the motivation? Motivation was to empower the employee, and they got to scale. Nobody was really doing the ROI analysis. Nobody was really studying that. That came a little bit later. The famous HR case study that resulted from all the experiments that Best Buy did, and that was the first time I think I saw real ROI metrics. But I think we've reached a different stage in the market where we actually have to start talking like other people. And we're talking to more people too. It used to be with marketers that we spoke with, and now we're speaking to increasingly the CFO. And I think, out of respect, I think we really should try to get this ROI argument right.
Speaking of the CFO, I got a question that came in on Twitter, again, #AskPivotCon. Where should an increase in your social budget, so to speak, come from? Should it come from other parts of marketing, from PR, or dictated by business goals? This is asked by Ricky in Motion. Your thoughts, guys?
I can start with that one. I in my role across sort of all multi-channel marketing and sales, because I do work in social, but I work across digital and sort of the connectivity with real world as well with clients. And part of that answer is, unfortunately, it depends, right? So by sector, meaning by industry and by customer segment, we know that social media plays up and plays down in varying intensity. If you're a pharma company and you don't have a social-based risk monitoring program in place today, you are at heavy risk in your industry. If you are a Comcast or a Dell or a Best Buy and you are doing excellent things in service and customer experience, then that is where you play up your social media investment. We get the question all the time. McKinsey is sort of we tend to get brought in for large transformations of organizations, and we get asked the question of, do we need to align these initiatives and investments across an organization, or is it okay that they're happening somewhat organically inside of a silo? And the answer that's emerging, and I won't say it's an answer, but what's emerging is that, and it gets a little bit back to this gentleman's point too, is that for that risk-taking and testing phase, some organic investment in the area of intense need is actually exactly what needs to happen to get some motion. But that an organization reaches a mass either by having multiple places in the organization where social becomes important, or by the scale of a single operation, that it then becomes a CFO level or a CMO level investment decision, in which case it looks more like a big company problem again, and then that investment moves to a different level.
And then at that point, to Chris's point, these different elements have to start working together in order to effectively leverage what you're
Frank
doing.
Eliason is my poster child for this answer always, because it can come from anywhere. What it requires is actually the courage to tell the emperor he has no clothes. So whoever inside your organization has a political will to actually bring forth that truth and take action on it and put their job on the line because they believe so wholeheartedly in this next thing that has to be done, that's where it's going to come from. And after that point of maturity, what you'll see is the need to start orchestrating instead of allowing for competing investments and having 5 different major parts of the organization investing millions of dollars in different listening platforms, for instance.
Yeah, I think the orchestration thing is starting to happen. Just one final word on this, but increasingly, it's still about making sure that you connect to marketing. It's that old expression, ask to the bank robber, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. It's still there. A lot of it's still there. And even if the CFO has to tap it to activate a customer engagement program, that's actually the rationale. It's customer engagement. And marketing may not have the role it used to have, but it still has the budget for that. And it's always at some point triggered.
Question from the front.
Things that happen to a brand, and Frank Eliason is also my poster child, because
I don't think you can. So the question was, how are you responding to something like the video that Frank Eliason showed before us, the Citibank video?
How do you use that as an opportunity?
As an opportunity. You're not going to predict that specific incident in advance.
Well, you can't use it as the first point of engagement, and I think that's the challenge.
Doing something.
That many people try to do that, and in fact, trust is earned over time. So you have to, develop those relationships and show that you're trustworthy and that you can earn their trust. And in fact, that's what the Citigroup CEO said in a public video statement last week. We need to earn the trust of our customers, and it doesn't just happen. You have to build to it, and you have to prove yourself worthy.
And when those incidents happen, I mean, you may not have, so to speak, a metric in place, I think, to say, measuring, what's the ROI of this bad video or something. But you should have some kind of monitoring, for example, going on if you're a brand like Citibank that has their volume of discussion, so that you are aware when this discussion starts to happen, and you're aware of whether this is something that is small enough and perhaps insubstantial enough that you don't want to draw attention to it by overreacting, or you see that it is something that merits some kind of response, and you thought these responses through in advance, and you're not kind of making it up on the fly when this bizarre video appears. You've already got some people in place who are thinking through these questions and what kind of approaches you can have.
I'd like to introduce a couple of concepts, or just ways I think of this myself, to be perfectly honest. Certainly there's listening and just sort of understanding the landscape, but I tend to frame things I tend to think of a company as really needing to do two things as a baseline. Whether you are doing great market-leading initiatives, you need to amplify and you need to interrupt. And when something is going your company's way, and you start to hear that in your listening, if you are not amplifying that, you are leaving money on the table. The Old Spice Man didn't really start out as the Old Spice Man. He started out as if you guys don't know that example, go look it up later, it's funny. He started out as a little bit, and he became a phenom, right? Because that company was listening, and they chose to amplify some very positive feedback they were getting about him. And if you are not willing to interrupt the conversation that's going around, you are also leaving a huge risk on the table. So if you have baby formula that is found to have beetles in it, and it is announced in the middle of the US, and 3 days later Saudi Arabia is pulling the baby formula off the shelves, you have got to deal with that. And so for an organization to be ready to deal with that, though, you need social media trained staff at every level of your organization, and you need processes that allow you to bring that up and into the places where it needs to get acted upon. So for me, it's not just about listening, but it's having some baseline processes in place for how do you respond. And that's a set of guidelines, and that's a set of go-to-market actions that take place, trigger-based actions that take place.
All right, everybody, join me in thanking them for sharing their wisdom. Appreciate it very much.